to celebrate what should not yet be a cause for celebration. It seems to me that there is a deliberate attempt by Western powers and their clients in the Middle East to deceive the Arab population into thinking that there are Arab revolutions and that they are bearing fruits. Yeah, the question that you were asking, which puzzled me, about if Western powers really want to help, they should need to do this and this. I mean, it seems to me this is not the question that is occupying Western capitals. The real question that is occupying the leaders of Western countries is in which way we can sabotage these Arab uprisings in every single country. And you wondered and you dismissed the possibility that the United States is going to intervene, as in other cases, for many historical reasons. Well, I think we need to remind the audience the United States is bombing Yemen as we speak, but more on these specifics as we proceed. The first thing I need to say is that even the terminology has to be questioned. I mean, we speak about the Arab Spring, and just like the names of other uprisings in Western Europe or Lebanon, these names are not coined by the people themselves. These are terms that are being thrown on us, and then we become recipient of terms that we did not invent. I mean, in Lebanon, they invented the term of a cedar revolution for a political movement that was an appendage of the Saudi intelligence service. I mean, if you can combine the House of Saud with revolution in the same sentence, it seems to me you need to have your head examined. The same thing today about the Arab Spring. I mean, what Arab Spring and why should we be celebrating? I mean, you look at the map of the Arab world, what do you see? You see in the Western press, or the French and the American and the British, there is a celebration already about a speech, a mere speech that the King of Morocco, I'm sorry, the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen, has given the other day. And we are supposed to celebrate the speech and equate it with political reforms. The kind of reforms that Hillary Clinton and Obama wish to impose on us, and that I wish the Arab people be spared. The Moroccan king is being hailed by Western leaders for the speech, which does not change certain realities about Morocco. That the king can still dissolve parliament, can dismiss minister, he still appoints the head of the Judicial Supreme Court, he is the head of the Supreme Military Council and the Security Council, and of course, most importantly, he remains the commander of the faithful, which he in the speech defined as the protector of the faith. And if I look at the history of his father and his rule and this guy's rule, it seems to me that the protection of the faith in their mind is nothing more than a recipe of allowing the Mossad a free reign in Morocco. Unless this ruling dynasty in Morocco believes the Mossad is the real protector of the faith of which they speak. You look at the situation. You look at the situation in Libya. Here was a genuine popular uprising against one of the most eccentric dictators who has been showered by praise in Western capital, who was about to receive his first large shipment of arms from the United Kingdom. This uprising has, alas, become a movement by NATO. I mean, we all follow Arab public opinion, and I have not ever seen evidence that when Arab people speak of reform, uprising, and change, they have in mind bombing campaigns by NATO. I mean, if I am supposed to celebrate NATO bombing campaigns in Libya, I may dissent in that need for celebration, especially when we have now a Libyan Transitional Council that has not been elected. Half of its members are secret to this very day. I am sure that leaders in Western capitals know the secret names. The Libyan people themselves do not know who they are. And we also see that the Libyan Transition Council is hailing the bombing of NATO even when they kill innocent civilians in Libya, just as the Libyan dictator kills innocent civilian. We are supposed to celebrate a revolution in Tunisia, and it seems to me it's far from being complete. The Tunisian people know this better than all of us, and they are insisting that much more has to be done, that the revolution has only begun, and there has to be a lot more accomplished before we celebrate and we start dancing to the music. I mean, revolution is much more than overthrowing a dictator, especially when even the trial of the dictator in Tunisia which began yesterday, is going to run into difficulties when the guy is still being protected by Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, as you know, Samuel Johnson said that patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels. And I think we need to amend that in the Arab world by saying Saudi Arabia is the last refuge of Arab scoundrels. And Ali Abdullah Saleh has joined with Ben Ali in being protected by the royal family, which is putting pressure on Tunisia and on Egypt in order not to proceed with any accountability or trial against the ousted dictators in those countries. I mean, in Tunisia, the ruler and his family has run out, but it seems to me there is clearly an attempt by the United States to manage the scene in order to protect the interests of the United States and Israel in those areas, and to prevent the people from pushing ahead with real reform and real change. As you know, one of the members of the Ben Ali family has been put on trial for a drug offense. And Ben Ali is even being put for drug offenses. It seems to me the crimes of Ben Ali are far beyond simple drug offenses. Something is going on. You look at Egypt, the most impressive show of popular tide of anger we have seen in recent times. And yet, what has happened in Egypt? We have an unelected military dictatorship, military junta, in the tradition of Latin American military juntas, which is running the show behind closed doors, without any accountability, suppressing the press, tormenting journalists, summoning one of the most courageous leaders of the youth revolution, my comrade Hussam al-Hamlawi, because he dared to criticize on TV the dictatorship of the military generals, all of whom have been handpicked by Hosni Mubarak himself, and I'm supposed to declare an end to the Egyptian revolution or to declare it a revolution? I mean, we have to examine our mind. It seems to me somebody has to, I guess, be the party pooper in this case, as we say in the United States, and try to disrupt the premature festivities of what's happening. You have a new Egyptian foreign minister. We don't know how they pick these individuals, by the way. The military dictatorship has picked a new Egyptian foreign minister, Mohammed Arabi, whose resume, as I'm receiving reports about it by Egyptians, raises a lot of questions. Here is a guy who volunteered to serve in Israel for 4 years. He volunteered. He wasn't even asked. Here is a guy who was tied to Prince Bandar when he was a diplomat in Washington, D.C., and he is very close to the corrupt business elite of the Mubarak entourage, father and son. And this guy is going to represent the revolutionary aspiration of the Egyptian people, of which Arab Spring are we talking? Of which Arab Spring? You look at the situation in Yemen. The Yemeni dictator has left into Saudi Arabia, although the country is still being run by his deputy, which is, of course, the U.S. ambassador in Yemen, who is running the show, the real deputy to, if not his boss, of Ali Abdullah Saleh. The United States is running a bombing campaign throughout Yemen. Saudi Arabia's control and bribery of the tribes continues unabated. As you all know, that Saudi Arabia since the 1960s has a special segment of the royal family which runs Yemen. Prince Sultan has been in charge, but of course since his death, Khalid bin Sultan has been the one who has been using the whip in Yemen. We've seen his military intervention in the Houthi rebellion. And of course, I refer you to YouTube to see how his special troops has been chased out of Yemen, running scared and screaming. And some of these scenes are quite amusing for the top elite troop of Saudi Arabia. You have Syria, which is a situation where there was a genuine uprising in Syria, which has now been hijacked by the Saudi clients, the Muslim Brotherhood of Syria, which is an organization has a very checkered history, has been aligned over the years with allies of Israel and Lebanon, among others the Phalange, and of course has been very close to Saudi Arabia for many, many decades. And there is a new council for leading the uprising, and if you read the names of the people that were announced in Turkey, of course it makes you more worried about what's going to happen over there. There is a clear attempt to revive the most primordial, atavistic, traditional forms of identities, because Arabs are not allowed to have their own Arab identity. And just last Friday, the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood-led faction of the uprising, I don't want to, in my condemnations, of course, generalize about all the Syrian uprising. There are many brave, honest elements of the Syrian uprising and opposition, but I'm talking about the elements led by the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood. And last Friday they declared a day of clans. You know, Jum'at al-Ashair. This was last Friday. I mean, of course that should raise alarms. I mean, we are going to return to the times when the tribes and clans prevailed in our societies. Has this not been a battle, social battle won by men and women, by Arabs decades ago when we got rid of colonial times? And whenever I see clans and tribes, I detect the dirty hands of colonial powers. Whenever they come to our region, the first thing they arise. Look at Iraq. The Iraqi people since 1958 have undermined the reactionary powers of the tribes, who are the real enforcer of oppression of women. And as soon as America entered Iraq, against international law, invaded it, you suddenly start hearing the tribes. Why? Because tribes are convenient. They are for hire, or most accurately, they are for rent, for the highest bidders. And you see the tribes of Syria now are in the bidding. And that's what's happening. You see a situation in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Jordan, where there were protests, and they have been, and Bahrain, of course, where there was a most genuine political uprising, which did not invoke sect, which has been against its will turned into a sectarian revolution in the Western press. Why? And the Arabic press, Saudi and Qatari funded, in order to justify the cruel military invasion of a country by Saudi troops. In Yemen, we are in good hands. As was mentioned by my colleagues, if you listen to American and British rhetoric, we are supposed to stay calm in Yemen. The situation is under control. The Saudi dictatorship is in charge, and it's going to steer Yemen in the direction of democracy. I mean, this is the actual rhetoric of the United States about what's happening in Yemen. So it seems to me there has to be a bit of caution. We have to be careful about analyzing and using labels that may not apply. It is a situation that is in flux. We should not allow the sensational media coverage to influence our approaches, terminology, or our analysis. The picture is not yet clear. Things are moving fast. And what we see now may be different from what may look a few weeks from now or from a few months from now. Who would have thought that NATO is leading an uprising in Libya? It may take years for the revolution, if they become revolutions, to take shape or to settle. Look at the lessons of real revolutions. In France, the French Revolution, Russian revolutions, Chinese revolutions, these are situations of revolutionary momentum. They do not stop. They continue. But revolutions engender counter-revolutions. The outcome is going to be the result of two simultaneous conflicts. One, between social forces inside each of the countries involved, and the second one between internal forces and external forces led by the United States, Western powers, Israel, and the local enforcer of the United States in the region. I also believe we should even be careful not to romanticize the uprisings, even if we subscribe to their goals of change and ouster of the regimes. There are many elements in each of the uprising has to be criticized. whether in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, whatever it is. We have to be critical of Libyan rebels when they oppress and massacres African people on the basis of their skin. We have to note that there were Libyan dark-skinned who were killed, tortured, and we have to be careful when we see references to African mercenaries. Oftentimes these are references by lighter-skinned people against darker-skinned people in Libya. Now, in talking about uprisings, I deliberately shy away from referring to them as revolutions. We have first to agree whether they are revolutions. I mean, we have to be careful, especially in Arab political context. Revolutions are often terms that are loosely thrown out in order to legitimize political situations that are far lower than revolutions. I mean, we have been accustomed since the 1930s by coup leaders to give the label of revolution on political change or military overthrow of governments. We have seen the Ba'ath excel in that. In Michel Aflaq's book, Fi Sabil al-Ba'ath, 1947, he in fact has a section, an article, in which he calls the Inqilab a revolution. I mean, is the mere ouster of a dictator in Tunisia or Egypt a revolution, or there has to be more, much more, before a political situation deserves the label of revolution? I certainly refer you to a great little booklet by the great scholar Hanna Batatu in his booklet on observations on the Syrian, Iraqi, Egyptian, and Algerian revolutions. There has to be certain conditions met before we agree on what is a revolution. Karl Marx was very clear in talking about revolutions. I mean, a political revolution is when the entire political order is brought down. The Egyptian political order has not been brought down. Tantawi, I mean, we see image of Tantawi handpicked by Mubarak as his trusted Minister of Defense. It's certainly not a revolution that is led by Tantawi. I mean, certainly I don't want to join a revolution that is led by Hosni Mubarak's Minister of Defense. Karl Marx, when he spoke about social revolutions, he spoke about a situation where the old social classes are brought down, not individuals. I mean, Ahmad al-Izz was not the entire old social classes of Egypt. He is merely a symbol. I mean, when another billionaire, Najib Sawiris, who was very close to the Mubarak ruling power until some financial disagreements 2 years ago, I mean, this guy now is a symbol of a revolution in Egypt. I mean, does that convince one that he can lead Egypt to revolutionary change, and he now heads one of the political parties that supposedly is revolutionary? It seems to me this is not what Karl Marx had in mind when he spoke about revolution. We should speak about class interests. Which class interests are these groups talking about? Who does Tantawi represent? As you know, Wael Ghunaim and others were in a recent trip in the United States, including the Minister of Finance in Egypt, who was handpicked by Mubarak. And they were meeting with the World Bank and IMF, who are going to come to our region and bring with them their dreaded recipe of disaster, deprivation, and war against poverty. How they apply it, it's war against poor people. That's how the World Bank and IMF translate war against poverty, by fighting poor people. The World Bank and the IMF, they used to go to Egypt and they used to go to Tunisia. The IMF hailed Tunisia as the model for the Arab world. You know that. That was their exemplary model. They used to go to Egypt and always insist on the reduction of public expenditure that benefit poor people: bread, health, education. They never once spoke about the billions wasted and embezzled by these dear dictators to the heart of the World Bank and the IMF. We should resist the temptation to follow the terminology of the popular cultures in the East and the West, especially when the popular culture of the Arab world not only mimics the popular culture of the West, but it's influenced by oil money. Our popular culture in the Arab world is dictated by the likes of Prince Al-Walid. Rotana, that's Arab political culture. It is not separate from the corrupt, oil-infected political order of the regions. Now, we speak about the Arab uprising. It seems to me we have to analyze their underlying causes. An attempt is being made, as usual, to deny us our agency, to claim that we are not responsible for what we have done, to bring down one of the most powerful dictatorship represented by Mubarak himself. This is not small feat. I don't want to be misunderstood. On the one hand, I want to insist that the revolutionary work is not done. But on the other hand, I want to be clear that much credit has to be given for what is being accomplished, for what is accomplished. I mean, to bring down Hosni Mubarak is not a small thing. I can tell by the amount of tears shed over him by the Israeli government. I can tell by the amount of tears being shed over him by the House of Saud. That tells me that this was a great loss to the Saudi political regional order that was set up since the death of Jamal Abdel Nasser. So we have to be balanced in giving credit, in being proud, but also in being very cautious about the future and the Arab counter-revolution. They want to convince us that what we did, Arabs did not do. As usual, and Arabs never win. When Arabs fight, they are accused of terrorism. When Arabs are not able to overthrow their governments, they are being blamed for acquiescence, passivity, fatalism, and they drench out all this classical Orientalist legacy to say that Arabs are just fatalistic, would not mind putting up with dictatorships in the region. In reality, the Arabs did that on their own. This is not some Western-inspired revolution. I am sick and tired of these theories being promoted by the New York Times and others that the Egyptian people really revolted because they read some silly pamphlet by some unknown American academic who wrote a book on nonviolence and it was translated into Arabic. I mean, I became part of the story, against my will, I should say, by the New York Times, because when first this insane story came out in the New York Times, which is now being repeated all over Western media, that this booklet about nonviolence by this retired academic, Gene Sharp, is what really inspired Arab people. I mean, of course, if you go to the Arab world, you ask them who Gene Sharp is, nobody knows who he is. And once that story came out and I mocked it on my blog, my dear friend reminded me, he said, do you remember 5 years ago, you called me and said if I want to look up this project to make some extra money. As it happened, there is this foundation called Albert Einstein Foundation, based in Boston, Massachusetts. They contacted me and they asked me whether I would like to supervise a translation into Arabic of a book by Gene Sharp. I took one look on that book on nonviolence, got bored to tears with it, and said absolutely I would not be involved with that. And then I referred them to my friend, who in turn was bored to tears with it and did not do it. So somebody else did that. So it is not like the Arab people heard about Gene Sharp and then they translated it. This was an American project. Also, I have to say this, when they try to patronizingly hijack Arab uprisings and praise it patronizingly as a non-violent great experience, I have to remind them, Arab uprisings are not non-violent. And please, I have no apologies to make about that. Arab uprisings are not non-violent. They are violent. And seems to me, against the violence of the Arab dictatorships, counter-violence is justified, provided it's not done by NATO, which has an agenda that does not coincide with that of the Arab youth. And certainly, when you look about the pernicious state of Israel, the Zionist occupier of Palestine, and which is a state that is based on the institutionalization of perpetual violence and terrorism, certainly the Palestinians are more justified to fight back. All those who preach to Palestinians non-violence are people who want the Palestinians to surrender. Because even when the Palestinians demonstrate non-violently like they did on the border, and Israel shoots at them, these same liberals then say, the Palestinians should forswear protest. That's the real agenda of Western liberals. They want the Palestinians to take occupation, enjoy it, and never resist ever in their lives. Certainly that's going to be a fat chance to occur. In the Arab world, there is absolutely a clear intent by the Arab youth to change their lives. And there are many lessons that can be drawn about what's happening. And one of the important lessons is that Arabs are capable of charting their own history. And that's very important to bear in mind, because now I am being very troubled by some of the conspiracy theories that are being promoted, sometimes by sincere supporters of Arab uprisings. I mean, the other day I heard a supporter of the resistance in Lebanon, somebody I met once, a Lebanese journalist, who is saying that what is happening in Egypt, what happened in Egypt was all the making of the American government. Even the ouster of Hosni Mubarak. And I'm thinking, I mean, how far do we go to insult ourselves? This is an insult to ourselves. Let me be on the record. Those of you who read me on my blog know, I am a proud conspiracy theorist. There are real conspiracies in our life. When NATO is running an uprising in Libya, that is a conspiracy. When Saudi Arabia is being asked officially to lead Arabs into democracy in Yemen, that is a conspiracy. But when Al Jazeera switches from being the voice of the Arab people into the voice of the counter-revolution, when Al Jazeera's slogan changes from being الرأي والرأي الآخر to الرأي والرأي نفسه, or the opinion and the same opinion, you know something is happening, and it is a conspiracy. When you see a revolution in Bahrain, a clear, genuine uprising in a country which has one of the longest, most admirable history of revolt that are non-sectarian in Bahrain, go back to notice that Bahrain was a pioneer, not only in the Gulf, but in the entire Arab world. Secular forces in Bahrain have been going against this royal family for decades. And they deliberately, as part of the counter-revolution, want to make it all a sectarian movement. I say to all people I know, I have been in contact with people in Bahrain since all this, before it was started, before it all started. I have been in touch with many of these people. I swear to you, I do not know the sect of any of those people. I know they come from different walks of life, but I do not know their sect. It's never mentioned. It's not on any of these people's minds. And yet, they force that on them to justify the military invasion of Bahrain by Saudi Arabia. And I think we have to be consistent. If we are against foreign occupation of our lands, we have to be against the foreign occupation of the House of Saud. I mean, I can say we should be against the occupation of House of Saud of Bahrain and of Saudi Arabia itself, but that's another story. I think it's very important not to believe. I mean, some conspiracy theorists are kooky. We have to dismiss them. I do not believe that the United States engineered the ouster of Mubarak. That was their best ally in the region. That was Israel's best friend. They would never, they would fight tooth and nail to keep him, and they did. As you know, America, while trying to take credit for Arab uprising, let's see its record. It's always on the side of dictators. Oh no, please. Obama did ask for Zain al-Abidin bin Ali to step down. He did. He waited until his plane was out of Tunisian airspace, and that's when he called for Zayn bin Ali to step down. He did. Mubarak now insults Obama, same group. Obama insults my intelligence by now claiming that he asked Mubarak to step down. Yes, he did. After he saw Omar Suleiman coming on TV to announce that Mubarak is stepping down. That's when Obama discovered his courage in Egypt. Plus, let's see what the recipe of Obama in Egypt was really about. They said, okay, we know that Egyptians would never stomach Mubarak to step down, to stay in power. What was the recipe for reform? This was announced by Hillary Clinton, that Omar Suleiman would take over and would lead reform in Egypt. I mean, just think about the absurdity. This is like saying, we want Hitler to step down and Himmler will lead Germany into reform and democracy. I mean, that's exactly what they're saying. I mean, this is the recipe for change. This is like saying Bashar al-Assad should step down, Maher al-Assad should be in charge. I mean, this is the rhetoric of America on democracy. In reality, no. The changes that are positive that happened, these were the deeds of Arab men and women. The bad things that happened, the prevention and the crushing of revolutions, that's the work of the West. Make a clear distinction. The Arabs did the good work. America and its client did the bad work. They are the ones doing the counter-revolutions with the participation of some Arab groups, make no mistake about it, like the Libyan Transitional Council, like the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. And there is a group like that. There are people like that in every country in the region. You know them. You see them on Saudi Arabian TV or Qatari Al Jazeera TV. I saw the other day a guy on Al Arabiya, the news station of King Fahd's brother-in-law, and he was from Bahrain. He was identified as Shiite. That's how sectarian they are. You know how they are. In Saudi Arabia, they don't even make any mass about how sectarian and how hateful they are in their propaganda. And the guy was basically saying Saudi Arabia's intervention was the best thing that ever happened, and this was a clear Iranian conspiracy, and of course, as a result, Saudi conspiracy is the best way to deal with it. It seems to me we do not have to overestimate the power of the West in our lives, or Israel, but we don't have to underestimate it. We have to be very eye-opened in knowing what role the West plays and what role they do not play. Since I'm coming towards like the very end of the time allotted to me, I want to make some observations about the counter-revolution. What we mean by counter-revolution is, for every revolution historically, there has been a counter-revolution. The counter-revolution has to be analyzed in social economic terms. It refers to those social classes and interests that have been harmed by political changes. In the case of Egypt, that would be the corrupt business elite that have benefited from infitah since Sadat's horrible days, which basically did two bad things. Created a relationship with the Zionist usurping entity, that's translation of Al-Kayan al-Ghasib, and it also opened up Egypt to capitalist invasion for multinational corporation to the benefit of Western powers. So which classes are harmed by radical change? These would be the two sides. So clearly a revolution is going to lead automatically, like the laws of physics, to a counter-revolution. What are the symptoms of counter-revolution? Something is very interesting happening in the Arab world. There was an article about this in the Los Angeles Times 2 days ago. Saudi Arabia is playing a very important role. Saudi Arabia is, I would argue, and I'm going to be writing about this in Arabic soon, there are two counter-revolutions in the Arab world today. There is a Saudi counter-revolution, and there is an American counter-revolution. I was talking to Fahd about that in the car during the 2 hours and a half from the airport to my hotel, since he got lost. What do I mean by that? Saudi Arabia historically never took initiative in the region independent of the US will. Saudi Arabia has been a most loyal servant of the United States and its interests in the region. Saudi Arabia now, especially for those of you in the Saudi opposition, is playing a very dangerous role. It's doing things on its own. And this is troubling the United States because they have such a low opinion of the Saudi royal princes. I mean, just think about a counter-revolution led by Khalid bin Sultan. I mean, that pleases me, of course. I want these really dumb Saudi princes to be in charge because you know they're going to screw up. After the ouster of Mubarak, Saudi Arabia decided to push things without consultation with Washington, D.C. Saudi Arabia believed that if we allow Washington to lead us, as it has for decades, we may face collapse. And if you read the account what happened in Washington during the Egyptian uprising, you read that Obama was on the phone daily with two people, Netanyahu and King of Saudi Arabia. We do not know if they were on the same time. Of course, it won't be unlikely, given the closeness of the relation between the two. And both of them were pleading with Obama to let Mubarak do whatever he wants to stay in power. Obama, while staying with Mubarak all the way, he was told by his advisor that the Egyptian uprising is so massive, is so powerful, no amount of firepower will crush it. That it will only hurt America's image. So they were not moral arguments by Obama. And of course they had high hopes that Omar Suleiman would take charge. Although they settled and they can do business with Tantawi anyway, and that's what they're doing now. That's when Saudi Arabia decided to take things in its own hand. And that's what's happening today with the nomination of Morocco and Jordan to join the GCC. And if there is a new right-wing dictatorship in Latin America would like to join the GCC, the Saudi king is going to allow it to join. I mean, it is open. Any right-wing dictatorships is now invited to join the GCC regardless of geography. The Saudi alliance, counter-revolution, is now working hand in hand with Israel. So you see what's happening. Israel today is side by side with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Let us not forget Qatar is leading the Arab counter-revolution. Parallel to that is an American-British-French counter-revolution. It coordinates with the Arab counter-revolution, but it has its own agenda because it doesn't trust, I mean, typical racist. They do not trust the brown people, even if they are their own potentates, to be in charge. And you see it in Yemen. There is some tension between the Saudis and the American. You see it in Jordan. I mean, Saudi Arabia wants the Jordanian king to crush any protest whatsoever. The Americans are pressing the king to give some compromises to the opposition and so on. You see it in Morocco, you see it elsewhere. So we have two powerful counter-revolutions. And it seems to me, for Arab uprisings to proceed, for them to be promoted to the category of revolution which they are not yet, there has to be a double uprising in every Arab country. There has to be a revolt against the regime and its new face, like Tantawi in Egypt, or the military dictatorship in Tunisia. And there has to be another higher level, second tier, another circle of revolt against the regional face of the counter-revolution. And this is why it's very important. I was a very close friend of Al Jazeera. I've been to Al Jazeera many times. Last July, I was in Al Jazeera's offices. I know many of these people, the top level and the staffers. I have praised Al Jazeera and I've criticized Al Jazeera. But I've always said Al Jazeera was one of the best elements we have in expressing our views. Now, it pains me to say Al Jazeera is now the voice of NATO. I saw Al Jazeera's director. I saw Waddah Khanfar, the director of Al Jazeera, just last July. He drove me because the Emir of Qatar wanted to see me. And I spoke to him against normalization with Israel and all these issues. And back then, the Emir of Qatar told me something which I remember. He spoke to me about he spoke to me about economic development in Qatar. And he was praising his own effort, how he's making health changes, education, so on and so forth. And I said, but what about political changes? It still lags behind. He said, yeah, you're right. He said, politically, we are not. I said, why? He said, because politically we cannot, any Gulf country can be ahead of any other one. We have to stay on the same level. And I say, what's the logic behind that? He said, that's how it is. Otherwise there'll be instability. I thought about that when Qatar joined Saudi Arabia and UAE to crush the revolt in Bahrain. That's how they think. And I remember asking him, if I want to form a political group in Qatar against normalization with Israel, can I do that? He said, no, you can't do that. So the point is, Al Jazeera has changed. Al Jazeera made peace with Saudi Arabia. Al Jazeera is now the voice of the counter-revolution. They have cancelled all of their talk shows because they do not want the other opinion. It is now one opinion. And this was one outlet that many of you in the Saudi opposition used to have. And that's the extent to which the Arab counter-revolutionary order want to control things in the region. In America, Al Jazeera used to be declared a terrorist network. Now, people in Congress, Zionists, are praising Al Jazeera, and Hillary Clinton even asked American media to copy Al Jazeera. I bet she wants that. She's very pleased. Al Jazeera English is now going to become available in many American cities after it was banned. And of course, Al Jazeera Arabic is even worse than Al Jazeera English in their coverage, especially in Bahrain. I should also say, before I continue, since I know many people in Al Jazeera, there are many writers, journalists in Al Jazeera Arabic and English who are very unhappy about what happened and who disagree with the changes and the shifts. And many of them are there trying their best to adjust to a situation they do not like. Lest I leave you with a negative, pessimistic impression, I want to remind you that Edward Said used to always, whenever things were bad, remind us to invoke the dictum of Gramsci, a distinction between pessimism of the mind and optimism of the will. And when you look at the Arab world, especially when you look at the history of Palestinian struggle, how can you not be optimistic? For more than a century, the terrorist Zionist movement has inflicted violence on a regular daily basis on the Palestinian people, and they have not given up. And NATO and its Arab allies are using violence in Yemen and elsewhere to crush the Arab revolutionary spirit. But it just won't work. You see, the cliche about Arabs in the West by Orientalists has been that the Arabs understand only the language of force. A Zionist philosopher, great mind, Hannah Arendt, in 1950 wrote an article, and she spoke to her Zionist colleague and she said, look at Palestine. You keep saying the only language the Arabs understand is the language of force. I must confess, when I look at the Palestinians, I say, the only language the Arabs do not understand is the language of force. If you have doubts about that, look at Middle Eastern archaeology. It is a testimony to the limitation of the military power of conquerors. One after the other. They come to our region, they set up regime, and then they get kicked out, and they take their dictators with them, or they seek refuge in Saudi Arabia. But eventually, even Saudi Arabia will be free. Thank you for listening.